Good afternoon. I'm excited to talk about snails today. I have a beautiful poem from Thom Gunn, Considering the Snail, and we did some of his more gritty, dark, humorous poems a few weeks back. But the whole reason I thought of Thom Gunn, great UK-born San Francisco poet of the 20th century, is because of snails. I kept seeing snails everywhere I went when I was in Sweden. I stayed in Sweden most of the summer, long walks, a lot of writing, a lot of meditation, a lot of other experiences, but it seemed like when I was least expecting it, I would see another snail. And I had never really, as the title of the poem is, considered the snail that closely. I mean, they're out there. We see them. You know, I grew up in the forest. I grew up gardening as well, and so I thought, well, this is the perfect time to do Thom Gunn, because the other reason snails came up for me in the last few years is I had discovered this lovely little wine, inexpensive, just everyday, but more complex than you would expect wine from Sicily, called Lumà. And lumaca is the word for snail in Italian. Interestingly, Chiocciola is another word for it, and that is how Italians say the @ symbol. Like we were giving out an email address, it'd be like da da da, Chiocciola, da da da, and it's a beautiful way to think about the @ symbol, because it is that spiral. And so I was looking at these tiny, tiny little snails this summer. I helped one that had a cracked shell. I brought him to a place where I thought he could maybe find some replacement, and seemed to be doing great. I observed him for 2 days and seemed to be getting along just fine. And so it's like just kind of like tracking that movement and watching how far he could get made me think of the Thom Gunn poem as well. And then I used an Italian keyboard. You know, it's not too different from other keyboards, American keyboards, but it has, of course, all of the vowels with the accents. And then whenever I see or type the @ symbol, I always think Chiocciola, which brought up kind of a fun thing about. I used that word once the same day that I learned the word for limping. And I was just thinking about how we just say the @ symbol or @ instead of Chiocciola. And then I walk every day wherever I was. Urban walking I love. Milano is one of the best walking cities in the world. I walked all over there in the months I lived there. And once I was out in one of the large parks on the edge of the city, and I did something stupid where I fell down and kind of twisted my ankle and my knee, and it wasn't good. And then I was kind of limping, and then later for the world's #1 walking enthusiast, it's kind of embarrassing to admit that, but I had a fall. I pride myself on nearly falling, just evading those types of situations, and I just bought it this time. But anyway, I realized that I didn't know the Italian word for limping, and I was like, I'm sure I've come across it somewhere over the years, but. So I was meeting up with a friend for coffee, and I asked, obviously I can look it up on the device, whatever, but I was like, I wanted him to tell me so that it would stick in my mind more. That's how I always learn languages better. It's like, it's the face-to-face, it's the interaction. It's finding someone patient enough to want to pull the language out of you and to speak a little bit slower. And so I said, what is the Italian word for limping? And it was like, and he didn't know the English word for limping. And so I said limping, and he didn't know what I meant. And so then I had to get up and I had to demonstrate. I mean, I wasn't really limping that bad, but then when I did it for him, I overdid it, of course. And then all of a sudden he says, zoppicando. And I'm like, of course it's zoppicando. Of course it's something that sounds ebullient and exciting if you don't know what it means. And that means limping. And then, so then I start talking about it. And then he says, the English word is limping? What is it? Limping? Limping. And I'm like, yeah, it's not the best word. It's not the best word. So it's like, instead of saying at symbol, you say Chiocciola. Instead of saying limping, you say zoppicando. So anyway, I'm going to dive into the Thom Gunn poem. And this is going to be fun. This is going to be joyful. And that's what we're going to do. It's going to be considering the snail. The snail pushes through a green night, for the grass is heavy with water, and meets over the bright path he makes. Where rain has darkened the earth's dark, he moves in a wood of desire. Pale antlers barely stirring as he hunts. I cannot tell what power is at work, drenched there with purpose, knowing nothing. What is a snail's fury? All, I think, is that if later I parted the blades above the tunnel and saw the thin trail of broken white across litter, I would never have imagined the slow passion to that deliberate progress. I'm going to read that last bit again, because he really stuck the landing there. It's like, what is a snail's fury? All I think is that if later I parted the blades above the tunnel and saw the thin trail of broken white across litter, I would never have imagined the slow passion to that deliberate progress. It's really quite lovely, and it's really quite lovely when you're amongst the snails, or you keep seeing snails. Whenever you look, they're on a leaf, or they're on a rock, or they're on moss, or they're doing whatever they do, and you realize it's like, unless you really observe them, you don't see them moving, and you don't think of them as having other emotions or agency. They're just there. They're recyclers, right? They're munchers and recyclers, and then they're also food for birds and frogs, maybe, and things like that. So they're an essential part of the whole process there, but you don't think about the snail's fury, their desire, their passion, their progress. And it's kind of neat when someone like Thom Gunn writes this, because some of his poems are very explicit when he's talking about sex clubs, drugs, all these different scenes, despair, broken people, things like that, and he does so in a formal way, but he's always in on the joke too. And in this one, there's not so much of a joke. It's close observation, but you feel, if you've read his other poetry, that he's leading you somewhere, and he's making you think far beyond the leaf where you see the little tiny snail, or you're not thinking about putting it in some garlic sauce with shallots and parsley and things like that. And so it also, snails also always draw you to the culinary. Obviously, they're absolutely lovely. I mean, it's all about the sauce, right? But there's a tradition in Italy, of course, in France, and you see them on menus, even in Pensacola, Florida, sometimes. But it also brought me back to Pensacola. There's a wine I champion. I sold the hell out of it for a short while because it wasn't available for too long, and I bought up, I think, 10 cases at one point because I love this wine. It was inexpensive. It was delicious. It was fruit forward, but what made it was this kind of like salty, but more than salty. It had this savory finish to it, kind of like herbal. And it was based on grillo, um, Italian word for crickets, but it's also a grape varietal that you find in Sicilia. And so this wine it was called Lumà, Snail, or that's like a shortened form for snail. Lumaca is, and it comes from a town, Sambuca di Sicilia, which is outside of Palermo. And the people there celebrate the snails. And so the marketing behind this wine, other than I think it could sell itself just on the taste, because it was just delicious, fruity, but then you have that complexity, you have that salinity, that no more than salinity. It was like a little bit some kind of herbal finish to it, and then just like in every Italian recipe, you have prezzemolo, you have parsley. And in this town, in Sambuca, which means elderberry, in case you didn't know, they have often been called the Sammucari Babbalucciari. Sammucari Babbalucciari. That they're called snails. And it's thought that the word comes from the Arabic. A lot of the Sicilian dialect words are influenced by Arabic, and so in this town they've celebrated it, and not only just because there are a lot of snails around there, and that the people are called snails, but it's just like that way of being in life, and that the slowness, the perfection, the deliberateness. And that's beautiful. And so this winery kind of tied that in to their celebration of the snail. And they had the snail, and then they had the text in a spiral around it, like Chiocciola. And so it's often seen as a pest. Most vineyard managers would consider it a pest because they munch on things like the buds and the leaves, and especially when the vines are young, and they can also jam up machinery, if you know what I mean. But this winery, they celebrated it, and it's from a town where they've celebrated snails. Apparently, in the piazza, in the main square in town, they have a large-scale snail sculpture. But they did this beautiful label where they celebrated the snail, and they said that that's a symbol that we're doing things right and natural and non-industrial, and we have a respectful way of doing things because the snails are our friends, and that this may or may not be true, but they said that they would observe the snails kind of on the periphery of these vineyards, and so they saw the snail as like a protector of the vineyard. That may be a little bit too much for me even, but it was one of the most poetic, beautiful, deep, multi-layered, interesting labels that I ever saw. And then the wine itself had a complexity that was far above its cost, so that was kind of exciting. And then the words they used were almost better than Thom Gunn's in the poem that I just read. It was like there's like una paziente ricerca al confine dei sensi, lentezza e perfezione. Un'idea di contemplare. They just go on and on and on. It was like about the patient research at the edge of your senses, at the confines of your senses, the slowness and the perfection, and this idea to contemplate. and then they also talk about il ricordo conserva l'emozione cristallizzata. It's something about the memory preserves the crystallized emotion. Yeah, conserva l'emozione cristallizzata, which also seems a little bit of a stretch for an inexpensive wine, but I loved their passion, or because so many wine labels, they go for the lowest common denominator. They just they're obviously just doing it to be bold and splashy, and just hit you immediately. And whereas this one, because of the way the text was, the art behind it, and the really quite deep multi-layered text that they used, it was like, wow, like you really have to pause and think about what they're saying. And it was a little bit of a mystery and a little bit of a piecing together, and it made me want to learn more about this town and the vineyard. But if the wine wasn't good, I would have just forgotten it. You can have all kinds of label. You can overdo your language on the front label and the back label. But if the juice ain't good, then we're going to have problems. So I think I'm going to wrap things up here. But I love the Thom Gunn poem. It's short enough. I'm going to read it again. I'm thinking about all the snails I saw this summer. I'm thinking about the one that I helped who had the cracked shell. I'm thinking about this wine that was delicious, and it was a limited time thing. I found some of my customers loved it at least as much as I did, and when they found out the price, it just flew out of there. But I always I tried to make sure to tell people the story and about the snails and the town, and then sometimes talked about the Chiocciola. Anyway, Thom Gunn says, the snail pushes through a green night, for the grass is heavy with water, and meets over the bright path he makes, where rain has darkened the earth's dark. He moves in a wood of desire, pale antlers barely stirring as he hunts. I cannot tell what power is at work, drenched there with purpose, knowing nothing. What is a snail's fury? All I think is that if later I parted the blades above the tunnel and saw the thin trail of broken white across the litter, I would never have imagined the slow passion to that deliberate progress. So I will end it there. I hope you have a fantastic day wherever you are, and we will talk soon.